Welcome back. We're at video number 8. It's been a little while since I recorded one, so here we go. The objective of this video is to talk about how to adjust the room brightness and the ball brightness. And we're also going to touch on the new table options or tweak menu that's provided in VPX 10.8. So as you'll see here from the tweak menu, we can page over to the table options and go down to the day-night option and just make the table darker and brighter. And in VR, you can see that the whole room changes with this setting. Before we dive in, I wanted to just let you know that Godzilla was recently updated, so if you want to follow along, go download the latest version. And also, let's quickly review what the day-night feature is in VPX. In older versions of VPX, you could simply go over to the visuals option in the table editor, and there was a day-night slider here that you could adjust. That's gone now. It's been moved into the video graphics preferences. Down in the lower left corner, you can override the table's day-night setting here, or you can do it from within the tweak menu, which I'll show you in just a minute. But the idea is that the table author gets to set what they want for the day-night setting, and if the user wants to modify that, they can do it through the tweak menu. So as the author, you set up what was called the day-night setting down in the lights tab under scene light scale. So 0.5 is like a 50% day-night setting. The day-night setting will affect the brightness of table objects if those objects have not disabled spotlights for themselves. So what do I mean by that? Let's go check out a primitive on this table. Okay, here I am showing the BM parts primitive. This is the primitive on the table that includes most of the parts that don't move. If we come over to the visuals tab for that part, you can see there's a property called disable spotlights, and that's set to 1, which means that the spotlights are disabled. So this means that the day-night setting will not affect the brightness of this part at all. If disable spotlights is 0, then the day-night slider will definitely affect the brightness of this part. Well, you might ask, why is this primitive set to disable lighting of 1? Why is it not going to be affected by the day-night slider? Well, these objects that are rendered in Blender and then imported into VPX already have all the lighting equations baked into them and aren't meant to be used inside a different lighting system. VPX has its own lighting system. So they're just meant to be used as is, and therefore we disable the spotlights for these objects. So if we want to make them darker or lighter to simulate the brightness of the room, then we'll have to take a slightly different approach, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Another important thing to know is that this primitive has static rendering checked. What that means is that while you're playing the game, the rendering engine does not continuously update the render for this object. And that's good because it takes computational effort to do that. So by making this static, that means that the VPX will pre-render this before you play the game, and then it won't have to do it again at all. That just makes the table run smoother. But if you're going to want to change the brightness of an object, it's going to have to get re-rendered. So how do you do that if you have the object set to static rendering? I'll get into that in just a minute, but it is possible now in VPX 10.8. Now let's talk a little bit about the tweak menu. What we call the tweak menu is the menu that pops up when you press the F12 key during the game. It's a new feature in 10.8, and you set it up using this option event for the table. Within this subroutine, we set up the menu options and we respond to them. This subroutine gets called initially when the game loads up, and that has an event ID of 0. If you're in the menu and you change an option, that's event ID 1. If you've reset all the options, that's event ID 2. And when you close the menu, that's event ID 3. An option is defined using this option property for the table. I've included a list of what the arguments are for that options property in this comment up here. I'm not going to get into how to set up options, but if you wanted to, there's plenty of examples in this table. There's lots of different options. I'm going to just scroll down to the bottom where we're setting up the room brightness. And this is a special case where we're not actually using the table option property, because we're using the day-night property of the table. And that is a native property that just is always available. It's called night-day. So when we are in the tweak menu and we adjust the day-night property in the menu, this night-day variable automatically gets updated. And it also generates an event ID 1, which means that the option has been updated. Now I've created a global variable called light level, and I'm setting it equal to night day divided by 100. Night day ranges from 0 to 100, but I want light level to be a fraction between 0 and 1. And I'm passing that value into a subroutine called set room brightness. Now when you update night day, it updates all the objects that do not have disable lighting set to 1. But for all the VLM objects where the disable spotlights are set to 1, we need to use this set room brightness subroutine. Set room brightness will update the base color for all the materials that are defined in this room brightness material array. So I'm going to update all of the materials that are assigned to the bake maps in the table. The VLM bake active material is assigned to all VLM bake maps that might have some transparency. VLM bake solid are for bake maps that are opaque. This is a material that is assigned to the ramp. It's not a standard VLM material, but we're using it in this case for the ramp. And there's another material that is used for the ramp specifically for the dust option that's in this table. The ramp dust primitive has disable lighting set to 1, so we need to include that material here. So real quick, if we go into the material manager, scroll down, you can see these materials in the manager, and basically all that this set room brightness subroutine does is it affects the base color of the material. So this color, which is currently set to a gray value. There's one more new feature of VPX that's important in this case, and that's the property called disable static pre-rendering. Remember how I described earlier that if a primitive has static rendering checked, then the look of the primitive cannot be updated in real time. However, if disable static pre-rendering is set to true, well then you can update the look of a primitive that has static rendering checked. It basically unchecks static rendering temporarily. So whenever a table option is updated, that passes event ID of 1 into the subroutine. And so we just basically disable the static pre-rendering in that case so that we can update the look of anything on the table. And then when the tweak menu is closed, which is event ID 3, we turn the static pre-rendering back on. So with this set to false, you get the benefit of the performance boost by having static objects on the table. Now that we've covered room brightness, let's talk a little bit about ball brightness. It's very subtle when you change the brightness of the ball, but I think that's important. You don't want the ball to stand out. You don't want it to be too bright. You don't want it to be too dark. It just looks strange. So to manage that balance, we have this subroutine called update ball brightness. In this table, update ball brightness is called from within the frame timer. So every single frame, we adjust the brightness of every single ball. And to adjust the brightness, you'll see it at the very bottom line here. It's just that we are updating the color of the ball. And a bright white color means that the ball texture looks as bright as possible. And a black color makes the ball perfectly black. There's an equation here that translates the RGB values of the ball color into a single number, and that number is assigned to the color property. You could, if you wanted to, change the RG and B values separately to make the ball an actual color rather than in setting its grayscale value. But, that's not something we're doing here. We're setting the base brightness of the ball based on this equation, and then there's other features in this loop that we're using to adjust the base value. So like if it's going higher, I'm darkening the ball slightly because it's getting further away from the general illumination. Also, if it's in the plunger lane, I'm checking for that, and I'm making sure it's a little bit darker over there because sometimes the ball looks like it's too bright when it's down in that little dark plunger area. There's lots of things you can do here. You can change this base equation if you want. In this case, I'm basing it on a constant ball brightness option, and then there's this GI level. So if the GI goes off, I'm making all the balls darker. If it comes back on, I'm making them brighter. The base value can be a maximum of 255 and a minimum of 0. Let's take a quick look at the table when the GI is turning on and off, and I'll zoom into a ball, and you can see how the color of the ball changes with the GI level. You can kind of see the ball brightness change there. I hope that was enlightening. Next up, we'll talk about render probes. See you then.